Alright, shalom YouTube. So I'm going to redo the biblical calendar video that I made. I'm going to leave the original posted and what have you. Now, the reason why I'm going to redo it is I think I went into too many tangents and what have you in regards to what's currently going on with the videos with the police brutality and what have you and the civil rights violations. I think that's subsided. It should have anyway, because the bottom line is it falls under Title 18, Section 242, as well as Title 18, Section 241, deprivation of rights under the color of law is 242. 241 is the conspiracy against rights. First Amendment quite clearly stipulates that Congress can't pass law indirectly or directly that prohibits the free exercise of religion, and therefore the judicial nor the executive branch can enforce that law. However, in that situation with the other videos with the police brutality and civil rights violations, you can see clearly that I was asserting my rights, and if you're asserting your rights, a right cannot be converted into a crime. So regardless, whatever the opinions of the judge and whatever orders they make, because they're judicial, regardless, whatever, even if they're administrative court, which would be legislative court, in other words, because all three branches, none of them can violate that free exercise, right? So that's the whole point of those federal laws, in other words, federal code anyway, under the United States Code for Title 18, Section 241, as well as 242, right? That goes over to the FBI, and I'll let them handle it. So that all said and done, I'm going to reiterate what I did in the other videos. I'm not going to have the video on me in this particular video, only based on the fact that I'm driving. I am in a not so well lit area. So rather than just seeing darkness the whole time for the majority, I have everything pointed towards the road. That way you can see my route home, right? Maybe you can find out where I live. So either way, that said, let's go to the calendar aspect of everything. Now, if you put it in a modern day, everybody follows, for the most part, the Gregorian Calendar, which is derivative of what the Pope instilled. So a lot of people want to make the argument that, well, I'll slap the Democrats around, for instance, but you have to keep in mind that when they go up against Trump and what have you, modern Christians do the same thing. I don't affiliate with either party because I'm a person that is distinctly on the side of complete separation of church and state. I can understand why Republicans would argue for their individual rights as being a Republican, and that's why they would vote Republican as a Christian. And likewise, I see the Democrat narrative where you have Christians on the Democrat side of things, but they're all partial in the truth. So if anybody's truly a Christian, they wouldn't want to have any affiliation with the secular government. Our argument, based on the fact that we have the Constitution in and of itself, we have our rights, right? We have our freedoms. Therefore, the government shouldn't be interfering with that right on any context or pretense or anything like that, regardless of whatever their thoughts and opinions are, right? They can't utilize the pretenses, say public health and safety, because the civil rights of the citizens is for the public health and safety and welfare of the nation, especially in regards to national defense, because it's a matter of national security. Because if you're alienating your citizen population, then the citizen population is going to go up against you, which is the whole purpose of the government, right? That's their job, is to protect our rights. Because when we got rid of the monarchy and founded the country, granted we had originally the Articles of Confederation, to where the states were sovereign for their in charge of all their citizens, but then eventually you had the Federalist Papers, and I'd recommend you reading them, to where it asserted the fact that we need to became United States, in other words, to defend the country, because each state in and of itself isn't going to be sufficient to defend the states from foreign invasion, whether it be from France, Britain, or what have you, especially if there's a multitude, because then each state would be reliant to defend itself and it wouldn't be able to handle the pressure. So that's why we became the United States, and that's why the focus was on individual freedoms, especially given if you go back to the Magna Carta and everything else. It was a matter of asserting the rights of the people, because historically the monarchy and what have you was doing their own thing, creating their own alliances and trying to, in their own right, defend the country, but at the same time they're jealous of this country, jealous of that country, fighting for this land, fighting for that land, and everything else. So hence, if you read the Federalist Papers, and I haven't read them all yet, but if you go to my website, which is actually in the bio for this channel, then you can see that I have a lot of information in regards to legal defense and wave. And I'm actually inputting a lot more information onto the channel. So originally I had a separate website for the scientific aspect of things because I wanted to have that disconnect, so to speak. But in modern day, with everybody seeing its disparity between science and religion, I'm just going to utilize my primary website for the elective Elohim, elective Yahweh.us, in other words. And I'm going to have the scientific involvement on that website so people can see that there is a direct correlation between science and religion, because in my honest way of dealing with things, science has become its own religion. So that all said, this is a video, as much as I've went 6 minutes into not even really touching base too much on the calendar, I'll start here and carry on. So we all currently live under the Gregorian Calendar for the most part, in Western society, which is derived from the Pope Gregory, right? And Pope Gregory, if you did a little bit of historical research, and maybe you'll see that the European countries all had different ways of celebrating the New Year and what have you, but it all basically stemmed off still similarly the Julian Calendar, right? You had some that swung on the method to where I think some countries were celebrating the New Year around Rosh Hashanah, around September, in other words, but they're all still following it, various New Years, like around the Ides of March and what have you. So Pope Gregory, when he instilled the calendar and made it the Gregorian calendar, he basically reinforced the Julian calendar. But he also likewise pushed the New Year all the way back to the beginning of January. So if you understand the origin of the names of the months, and I'd recommend that you do, and I'll put it on my website as well, the January and February originally didn't even have names at all. If you go back to the Julian calendar, the predecessor to the Gregorian, and then eventually they were incorporated where they had names for the months. They just originally had numbers, but they had names, and then similar with all the other months. They were pretty much numerical for the most part. Even July and August were numerical, but then eventually the numerical aspects of it were changed to, like, July is named after Julius Caesar, August is named after Augustus Caesar, but you'll still see September, October, November, and December, but they're proclaimed to be the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th month consecutively, however, respectively rather. But in this particular case, they're literally the names, they mean the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th month, right, respectively. So that all said, it's based on these transitions and what have you, that there's been time distortions and what have you throughout history, and so you can't really rely heavily on, well, if you go from like the year 1667 to the year 1665, you'll see that there's a change of the year during that time frame, to where you can't rely on it as, like, say for instance, July 6, 1667 from July 6, 1665. That's not going to be 2 years. That's not going to be 2 times 365 days, based on the fact that they changed the calendar with the Gregorian calendar, right? You can go to the laws of the Duke of New York and what have you that validates that exact situation where the year changed and they adjusted the months. So that's well documented. That's a historical fact that did occur, right? Now going back with the January and February, January is named after the Roman deity Janus, right? The whole point of the Julian calendar, it's a Roman calendar, right? So originally, again, it didn't have a name and wavy, but the Janus being the two-faced deity, that's what they put their name to January, made it the New Year. Even during the Julian calendar, the New Year used to be around the Ides of March, but they changed it to the beginning of January at one point in time. Then eventually everything changed again. People went off their own ways, followed their own calendars, right? But going back to the fact that it literally used to start around the Ides of March and what have you, that's still implemented in modern society to, like, the change of government with the president and what have you, begins around the beginning of the new year, like 5 days after the 15th day of the month of January or what have you. January 20th, I think, is the inauguration day, or 21st, somewhere around there. But either way, regardless of whether or not, I know you can find that out for yourself, but that follows in line with the Ides of March being that transition of the government, right? So because the Age of March used to be around what the New Year is. Now, if you're to put it in the other dynamic, because that's dealing with the romanization of the calendar, the biblical calendar, because you have to understand what I understand to understand it, and I'm going to tell you what that is. So that's on the Gentile level, Gentile calendars, because Roman calendars, Gregorian Calendar, even though the Pope proclaims himself to be the leader of the church and what have you have to keep in mind that he is not the leader of the church. The church was changed back around 300 years after Yeshua, when Emperor Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday, which is a literal day to worship the sun, but he took that from the Egyptians, who took it from the Babylonians, where Nimrod was worshipped as the sun god Baal. His wife Semiramis was worshipped as Ishtar, the queen of heaven, where the concept of when you die you go to heaven comes from. And Tammuz, being born after the death of Nimrod, was considered to be his reincarnation, becoming the new sun god Baal, right? So that all said, that leads into everything as it happened, because again, modern Christians worship on Sunday, which breaks two commandments: no other gods before me, as well as the weekly Sabbath. So they're not legitimately Christians, because if you're breaking the commandments, you're not a Christian. As much as modern day Christians want to proclaim, well, it's okay to break the commandments, and they utilize the concept of grace as being justification for breaking the commandments, yes, you will not die if you break the commandment. Now, if you break one of the 5 commandments of love thy neighbor as thyself, regardless of whatever anybody believes, chances are people that, whether they have a Bible in their hand or not, some people will kill you for that. So that's what a lot of people don't understand. It's like, it's just common sense. You know what? You're infringing on other people's livelihood, and if you're doing that, then you're going to alienate them, and they're going to come after you. So regardless of what people perceive it to be, yeah, that's the reality. So you'll see that historically, and you'll see that in modern society, to where people that can be the most satanic in a sense, well, if they have their wife cheat on them or what have you, they might end up murdering their wives or what have you. So there's a lot of different things that go into that. But nevertheless, just because we live under the grace of Yah doesn't mean that we are allowed to be disobedient. That's excusing the bad behavior of the calendar, of the everything, and you're not supposed to do that at all, right? So that said, let me just readjust that, because that was a accident scene there to where somebody, it looks like they ran over a deer. But either way, going into the other context here, so that all applies with the Babylonian concept that I just mentioned, that to the correlation with the Hebrew calendar, the modern Hebrew calendar. If you were to look at the modern Hebrew calendar, the majority of the names of the months are numerical, but utilizing Babylonian terminology. So they are still numerical for the most part, but they are utilizing Babylonian naming conventions, right? So with the exception of one of those months. One of those months is named after Tammuz from Babylon, right? So going back with him being worshipped as the sun god Baal and what have you, you can see the correlation in the Old Testament as well, where it refers to Tammuz and what have you. So that's something known, right? He came from Babylon, he was worshipped as the sun god Baal and what have you, and everything changed over to the sun god worship, right? So even prior to Emperor Constantine, there was Christians that were worshiping on Sunday and what have you, because again, they're sun worshippers, right? A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions, and it's been perpetuated for thousands of years, those misconceptions, which was the point of Yeshua. He was basically going up against the Jews of the time that were being disobedient to Yahweh and his commandments, following the vain traditions of men, in other words, and based on that, everything was bastardized, right? So after the fact, if you go into the letters that Shaul, the Apostle Paul, in other words, was writing, he was talking about the heresy and what have you that was coming about within the churches and what have you, because they're stepping away from what the truth was and becoming heretics. They were still stemming back into following the vain traditions of men. If you were to put it into the Old Testament dynamic, when Israel had their exodus from Egypt, right, they were in the desert, and they consistently wanted to be disobedient to Yahweh, right? They started worshiping golden calf and everything else, and they didn't have faith and everything else, because the whole point of the Bible is not to say that Israel is benevolent, but rather they are obedient to the truth for the most part, going through Abraham and what have you, going through Noah and what have you, and based on that, it's progressive action, right? It's a matter of understanding that we're still children in the eyes of Yah. We're nothing in comparison. He knows everything. He knows why he created us, what's going to happen, and everything like that. He's omnipotent. He knows all, right? So a lot of people try to utilize that. Well, if he knows everything, why does he allow it to happen? It's like you're the one that's allowing it to happen because you're not being obedient to him, and based on your disobedience to him, you're blaming him for the things you're doing yourself when you have that free will to free exercise, do whatever you want. Natural laws is a lot of people will try to claim it, and that's the foundation of the United States system, is that yes, we have that freedom from establishment as well as the freedom of exercise. People will try to proclaim that it works in against each other, but the reality is it works in tandem with each other, right? So that's going back to the Hebrew calendar. That again, they don't follow the Hebrew calendar. Now, if you go to Leviticus 23, it tells exactly what the holy days are. You have Passover, unleavened bread, the Feast of Weeks. You have Pentecost, otherwise known as Whitsunday, otherwise known as Shavuot. When it's called Pentecost, Pentecost literally translates to day 50, and it's also called Whitsunday because it should always be on Sunday, right? But if you're to look at the Orthodox Jews and what they do, you'll see that their observance of Pentecost goes on different days of the week. It's not, sometimes it might fall on Sunday, but for the most part it's not going to be on Sunday or what have you. It's going to fall on a different day of the week, right? Because they're not following Leviticus 23, right? So that's, and you'll also see that they don't follow the Feast of Weeks. They don't follow the counting properly, the counting of the Omar or anything like that, and the waving of the wave sheath and everything else. And that's what gives them that variation within their calendar that isn't supposed to be, because they're not literally Jews, right? So they might have a little bit of heredity in them, and same with the line of Japheth might have a little bit of heredity of the Israelites, but for the most part, when the line of Japheth went over to Europe rather, Ham's line went to Africa, and Shem's line went to Asia, right? And from Shem's line came the Hebrews, which is where the Israelites come from. They don't come from Japheth's line. So going back to the Torah in the book of Genesis, you'll see that the line of Japheth, from the line of Japheth comes the house of the Gentiles, right? And you'll see that one of the names of the months is one of the names of the children is Ashkenaz, and that's why the Orthodox Jews proclaim themselves to be the Ashkenazi Jews, because they're not off the line of Israel, to be honest with you. I mean, that may have a little bit of heredity, but if you go into a lot of the other complex details that I was formerly familiar with, I'm going to eventually put up on my website. I'll do the research again, and I'll formalize that, and that way it's substantiated. I've never been really a good note taker, even in high school. I'm the kind of person that will remember things, but at the same time I don't take notes. So the website is me more or less doing something that I never have before, which is me taking notes, or putting it all down, making sure that people have that justification that they need. Because even when I did mathematical equations, again, I went to college for engineering, what have you, and I took calculus B prior to graduating high school at the collegiate level. So that said, I never really was good at showing my work when it comes to mathematical equations, what have you. So now it's a matter of me being older. I need to substantiate everything with, especially if I pass away for whatever reason, then my family as well as anybody can look at the website, and I'll make sure that it's, even after my death, I don't have to renew it. So I'll eventually swing it over to where it's a free website somewhere, to where I don't have to renew it periodically, and that way it's accessible even if after I pass away. Now, so that said, those calendars, the Julian, the Gregorian, and the modern Hebrew calendar, you can see aren't the actual calendar. And going through Leviticus 23 with the holy days and understanding the dynamic of the Ashkenazi Jews, I didn't go through all the holy days yet. I stopped at Pentecost, but then you have Rosh Hashanah, which is the first day of the 7th month per Leviticus 23, and it occurs around September, which literally means the 7th month. Then you'll see different sects of the Ashkenazi Jews in Israel and what have you, because they have two different calendars that they follow technically. So those that are observant will still follow the new year around in the spring, but then you have the different sect of the Israelites, the non-observant sect of the Israelites in Israel, that will celebrate the new year around Rosh Hashanah. They consider that to be the new year, right? So then after Rosh Hashanah, you have the Day of Atonement, otherwise known as Judgment Day. Then the final holy day in the year would be The Feast of Tabernacles, otherwise known as Sukkot, otherwise known as the Feast of Booths, where basically it's Abraham was searching for the holy city, which is Jerusalem in modern day, right? That's why it's considered to be the holy city. It was what Abraham was looking for. That's why you have a lot of contention in the area, because you have a lot of people that want to proclaim ownership of it. You have the Ishmaelites, you have the Orthodox Jews, and what have you to a degree, want to proclaim ownership to it. Then you have the Black Hebrew Israelites and what have you, and you even have the modern Christians to a degree that want to have some level of sovereignty. That's why the Crusades and what have you happened, because they thought that they're the descendants of the kings and queens of the Old Testament, of the Israelites, in other words, and that's what they gave them their sovereignty. However, they didn't have pure hearts. They weren't truly from the lineage, and regardless of whether or not they were, in true biblical fashion, which the country was founded on, is that we're all created equal. It's not a matter of your heredity. It's a matter of your obedience to the Torah, or Ten Commandments, in other words. So anybody can be a part of the kingdom of Elohim. Anybody can be saved. Anybody can be redeemed, regardless of... Yahshua did proclaim that he came but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, but Romans 2 again clarifies that a Jew, by nature, if they are obedient to Yahweh and His Ten Commandments, becomes, a Gentile, if they're obedient to Yahweh and His commandments, becomes a Jew. And likewise, if a Jew is disobedient to Yahweh and His commandments, they become a Gentile, right? That's why there's a lot of alienation during that time frame. With Yeshua saying what he did, because the Jews were prideful, right? And that's what it was. It was a matter of their pride. And they didn't want to share salvation with the remainder of the world, and they're basically stuck up bias, in other words, right? But at the same time, they're also likewise allowing people to become the part of the priesthood. They had no familiarity with how to observe the holy days and everything else, and they're bastardizing the observance of the holy days, which obviously you look at what's going on today in today's society, you can see that, right? I've validated that. So that said, you do have your biblical calendar that starts with the month of Abib. Some of the months did actually have names. The month for the first month of the year is the Abib, which means to come alive in Hebrew, right? It could be translated as Aviv, depending on how you want to see the B's, if they're V's or if they're B's. And then I have to go through the linguistics of that myself to a degree, because I have to see if I'm accurate in that translation, because it's a matter of understanding, right? But the reason why it's called Aviv or Abib is because, and to come alive, is because that's when you observe the new year, when the barley comes alive, and the new year being revolving around the moon cycle. So you have a lot of Messianic Jews that'll have their arguments as to when to properly observe the new year, based on the new moon, whether it's based on the new moon cycle this here or that there. So you have some disparity between, you'll have a little bit of conflict within those different calendars based on how they want to observe when the new moon comes in, right? So that said, but there is a pattern within the observance of those holy days. And knowing the calendars, I didn't, being a former member of a Black Hebrew Israelite church, I know for a fact that I am doing it properly, because it falls in line with other cycles. Say, for instance, with the full moon, when the Feast of Tabernacles starts, the first day at sunset, that it should be a full moon for the Feast of Tabernacles. If it's not a full moon, you're not in proper observance of the holy days, right? And I utilize that as my justification to find out who the real church is, because if most people, they'll utilize the name Yeshua, which means he saves, but his name was Yahshua. He came in the name of his father. Literally, Yahshua translates to Yah is salvation, or Yah saves, right? And if you want to understand where the name comes from Psalm 68:4. States quite clearly to extol him by his name Yah with a J. But if you understand the transliteration of languages and what have you, understand that J as well as I replaced Y in a lot of cases. So if you go back to the original King James Version of the Bible, the name was Iesus, not Jesus, right? And I was in there instead of a J, just like J sounds like Y in a lot of cases. And my name, Obadiah, right? If you were to look at the Old Testament way it's written in the modern English text, it's Obadiah, right? Because an I is where the Y should be. And you extol him by his name, Yah, that's why hallelujah gives him the highest praise, but most people put a J where the Y exists, right? And then you go to the fact that Joshua, the son of Nun from the Old Testament, was actually Yeshua. He was Hosea on high, which was renamed by Moshe to Yeshua, and he was part of the lineage of Yehuda, right? Yehuda, not Jehuda. I mean, not Yehuda or what have you, or Jehuda or Judaism or what have you. Because again, you have to understand that even calling a Jew technically a Jew is derogatory, right? But that side of the true name of the tribe is Yehuda. He did have Judas, which was from the tribe of Yehuda, and his name I think was actually Yehuda, to be honest with you. But that said, he was disobedient to Yahweh, so he wasn't really from the tribe of Yehuda. He wasn't really a Jew, and he was backstabbing Yeshua, right? So that said, that's the whole point and purpose of what Yeshua is preaching, is being obedient to those 10 commandments and what have you, and doing good to those that harm and persecute you. So even though he understood what was going to happen with Yehuda, he still allowed it to happen, what have you, and he still did good to those that harm and persecute him, allowed Yahweh to deal with the transgressions, right? So now that you understand hopefully a little bit more clearly what the calendar is to a degree, you'll understand that that's why there's a lot of conflict going on today in modern society still with the state of Israel, because Israel is the people, not a place, and due to their disobedience to Yahweh, that's why you have a lot of conflict in that area. So you might have some of the black Hebrew Israelites that are assisting, so to speak, with the Arab nation, the Ishmaelites, because Ishmael is one of the children of Abraham as well. He's the firstborn son of Abraham, but he was born from a concubine, whereas the actual wife of Abraham was Sarah, and that's where Isaac came from, right? And from Isaac came Jacob, or Jacob, and Jacob was renamed to Israel. So the Ishmaelites, aka Muslims, are actually they are related directly to the Israelites, but there's a lot of things, I mean, going back to the history with Emperor Constantine changing the Sabbath, what have you, that caused a lot of alienation, and based on that, that's why a lot of the Ishmaelites, which from what I gather 362 years after Emperor Constantine made his changes, they made their changes and they became their own religion. And that's why you have all that conflict, is because they understand to a degree that modern Christianity has been bastardized, and that's why they go up against modern Christianity as well, the Orthodox Jews, for just cause to a degree, but they don't acknowledge the fact that they're complicit with the same level of ignorance. Because I'll have to do my due diligence on the Quran, and it will go up on my website and what have you as well, and I'll have to read through it and what have you, no different than I do everything else, because I can't be ignorant and under any condition. So I'll have to go through it, but somebody has stipulated to me previously, that was a former Ishmaelite, aka Muslim, that the name Allah and what have you is derivative of the moon goddess, which Ishtar was considered to be the moon goddess, the fertility goddess. That's why Ishtar sounds like Easter for a reason, because you have bunny rabbits around that time frame, because it celebrates her. It has nothing to do with Yeshua. And that's why there's a lot of symbolism with the rabbits around that time frame, time of year, because she is a goddess of fertility. And then same with Tammuz, December 25th, it celebrates his birth. It has nothing to do with Yeshua, right? So understanding that context, and understanding that, like, when you die you go to heaven. And I think that when it comes to the Ishmaelites, if they're die, they'll have virgins in heaven or something like that. So that whole concept is Babylonian nature, stemming off Ishtar and what have you, the goddess of fertility. But again, they proclaim her to be the moon goddess, and then again, obviously, which would correlate with Nimrod being worshipped as the sun god Baal, her son also likewise being considered to be his reincarnation, being worshipped as the sun god Baal, and actually, and I'll have to look it up and figure it out, but I do think that there's actually a correlation between her and her son having sexual relations with each other, which has been documented historically. That's why historically you'll see that there's confusion between Tammuz and Nimrod in that accord, because Nimrod was being older than Semiramis, but her son obviously would be a lot younger. So when he came of age, so to speak, then she had relations with him as well. So mother and son incest kind of thing, which correlates to everything that happened with the European royalty, why there's a lot of inbreeding and incest within European royalty, right? That's why in the American society you have laws against incest and what have you, based on that whole thing, that whole concept. So I have to look into that. Not as if I'm looking to go out with my cousins or anything like that, but at the same time, I don't think scientifically it's founded as far as anything other than it's a matter of the European royalty was prominently incestual. And same with anything biblical. That's why you have a lot of slant against the Bible, and why you have a lot of people that are contentious against it based on incest, based on, I mean, look at evolution theory. If you go to evolution theory all the way back to what they perceive as being, it would have to start with two people. Regardless of however you want to assess it, it had to start with two people. Two people had to evolve and have the same genome, right? Then those two people mated and had other people that had the same genome, and that's how everybody would evolve and what have you, and have that same genome. So they wanted to test, because they just test the aspect of incest, they wanted to go up against the Bible in that accord. But there's a lot of incest throughout history and what have you. Even modern day, you have still a lot of incest going on. So I don't think there's the complications that scientists want to proclaim. I think it's more a matter of a slight against the Bible, no different than evolution theory is. Slight against the Bible, same with the Big Bang Theory. It's to get people away from the Bible and the Abrahamic faith in general, because the Abrahamic faith, the big three, have caused a lot of complications throughout history. But a lot of it is based on misconceptions. Same with the Aryan race. Look at what the Nazis did, what the Sumerians. If you watch the TV show Ancient Aliens on the History Channel, what do you think that's all about? The Sumerians, the Aryan race, right? That stems off the Assyrians, right? And everything else, the Sumerians and everything else, right? And it all stems off Babylon, right? So it's a matter of that misconception of the Bible. They want to utilize conjecture. The sons of God took on wives of the daughters of men, as basically meaning the angels had bred with the humans and created a hybrid race called the Anunnaki, right? I think they're not the Anunnaki, the Nephilim rather, but the angels were the Anunnaki rather, from a different planet, right? And that's inaccurate, right? It's because it's mistranslation. It's the sons of Yah took on wives of the daughters of men, which in other words means those that were obedient to Yahweh and His commandments, right? We didn't have the commandments. It was the Noahide laws at the time, because the Ten Commandments didn't exist. And they took on wives of the daughters of men, men being those that were disobedient to Yahweh, that weren't following the Noahide laws, and they had their daughters, and then because they looked fair to the sons of Yah, they took them on as wives, and they bastardized the truth. And that's what corrupted the truth, and that's why Yahweh had the flood and destroyed the earth, right? So that's the whole principle behind that, and that happened in the year 1666. If you go to my website, I do have the biblical validation of that. I'm going to try to fix that in the way I have it organized, because I do think I made it was years ago that I created it, and I want to reconstruct it to make it a little bit more seamless, right? But at the same time, yeah, it's something you want to look into, because that's where the whole concept of the Nephilim comes from. Nephilim in Hebrew translates to giant. And if you go to the book of Numbers, chapter 13, I think it is, when it talks about the spies being sent into the land of Canaan, it refers to the Nephilim, the giants, the sons of Anak, in other words, because that's what the Nephilim really are, is sons of Anak. Just a human being that was really tall, the Canaanites, in other words. Like Goliath was a son of Anak, for instance. He was a Nephilim, right? He was a giant. So that's why they have that correlation when it comes to the ancient aliens, because they want to claim, well, they're aliens and they're the human alien hybrids, right? The angels, the Anunnaki. But no, it's no. Especially if you go to book of Malachi and what have you, it'll talk about the exact same concept that the Levites, which are the priesthood that should be helping Israel purify their hearts, were taking on, again, wives of the daughters of the men, and they're punished accordingly based on that transgression, right? So that's why you have all these different diasporas, the 10 lost tribes and what have you, which is known and what have you, because people don't understand history, and then people want to just bury the truth and bury history, because that's the whole concept of the pretense of science that's being utilized today, is to bury the past, bury history. So if you go back to the calendar aspect of everything, you'll see to where they had their little hand in the adjustment, where instead of following the moon calendar, they made it a matter of revolving around the sun. Again, sun god worship and everything else, right? Helping you correlate everything. Everything is revolving around sun god worship. So that said, that's why even scientists in that aspect of things are revolving around the sun, right? And it's a matter of not worshiping either. And that's stemming off of Nimrod and Tammuz being worshipped as the sun god, Baal, Semiramis being considered to be the goddess of fertility, or otherwise known as the moon goddess, Venus, and everything else, right? So eventually my website will have all those correlations and what have you, and I'll substantiate it, because I'm a facts over feelings person. So even if I'm bothered with what I read or what have you, I have to accept it as being truth and try to take it as it was written and meditate and try to understand it more in depth, because it's, even if the truth again hurts your feelings, it's a matter of asserting the truth, understanding what the truth is and what have you. So that's the whole purpose of true Christianity, and a majority not understanding true Christianity, following the vain traditions of men, following what their pastors have taught them, following what the fathers or priests or what have you have taught them, what the rabbis have taught them, what the Ishmaelites, I don't know what they call their people, but what they teach and what have you. It's a matter of people just following the vain traditions of men, not doing the due diligence and researching and figuring out things for themselves. So hopefully this will help you out and help you understand the various dynamics of the biblical calendar, and I'll hopefully have more videos posted in the future in regards to that Babylonian and Assyrian correlation and everything else, right? Looking at the symbolism and everything, right? Shalom.